Have you noticed the news recently? Something's going on in the Middle East. Now, I actually haven't listened to the news in the last 3 or 4 days, so maybe something has happened I don't even know about. But it does bring our attention to the fact that Israel is in the news. And natural Israel is going to be the focus point where the kingdom of God finally originates from. Now, you all know what Ezekiel 38 is about. It's about the last attack upon Israel that's still in the future. Now, we're going to look at that. We're going to explain why we think it still is future, because there are other opinions on this on occasion. And then we're going to look backward to see what has happened since the regathering of Israel as a nation in 1948, and see what scriptures kind of tell us the sequence of events that has been occurring. Now, there are events that have happened in the near distant past, I would say from 2020, about the last 6 years, that have surprised me. Not the least of which is the current debacle against Iran. But being surprised means it focuses our attention and makes us think, well, what is the pattern of things in the scriptures? Okay, let's start by looking at Ezekiel 38, verses 1, 2, and 3. The word of the Lord came unto me, saying, Son of man, set thy face against Gog of the land of Magog, the chief prince of Meshech and Tubal, and prophesy against him, and say, Thus saith the Lord God, Behold, I am against thee, O Gog, the chief prince of Meshech and Tubal. Now, you see on the screen the list of nations that are involved as helpers and assistants to Gog and Magog. But what is Gog and Magog directly? Now, if I ask most of the brethren who have looked at this before, they would tell me it's Russia. I think that that is correct. I have heard other opinions, but I believe it's correct. Now, there is interpretation in so many things, I don't want to insist, but I believe that it is. Now, if you look at other translations, you're going to find other translations, like Young's literal translations, do render this differently. It will say, the prince of Rosh, Meshech, and Tubal. Now, I've looked and I found the same thing in Rotherham, in the New American Standard Bible, in the Septuagint version. Now, that's interesting to me because Septuagint is a Hebrew translation from Hebrew to Greek many, many years ago. I mean, many centuries ago. So they had the same concept, and the RVIC from Brother Jim Parkinson has a footnote that suggests this, and there's probably 10 other renderings as well that we found on the internet. Why is that meaningful? Well, I'm not entirely sure because I don't know Hebrew and I don't want to be insistent. But if it is the prince of Rosh, Meshech, and Tubal, then perhaps that connects, this isn't fresh with me, but with other brethren, to Russia, Moscow, and Tobolsk, which are all three names that would identify Russia. Now in Ezekiel 38, verse 15, it says, Thou shalt come out of thy place of the north parts. Now you see on the map that's on the screen in front of you, that if you find, it's hard to see, but if you find Israel on that map, you see how small Israel compared to all her neighbors are. But it's a little brown sliver south and, on the coast, eastern coast of the Mediterranean there. You look directly north, you're going to see mighty Russia, and Moscow is going to be positioned in the north of Israel. So this tells me that this common view of Russia probably is right. Now in 1989, when the Soviet Union dissipated, I was surprised because I've always thought this was Russia, so now are they still going to be involved? Well, the person that was involved in that was Gorbachev. Now, I don't know what you think of him. I don't get involved in politics. I can't say that I don't have opinions, but I don't get too deeply involved. But I thought of Gorbachev as a good person. Tried to do something good for his country and try to mitigate against the problems that he had with other countries. And then after them came Boris Yeltsin. And I thought he also had a good disposition. He had a little bit too much wine sometimes, but other than that, I thought he had a good disposition. Now, the new leader in today is somebody that I don't have the same opinion of. Things have turned radically, and now I have no problem understanding how Russia could be an advance against Israel. That seems to be something that would be compatible. Now, you see the list of other countries there: Persia, Cush, Libya, Gomer, and Togarmah. We'll find those in verse 5. Persia, Ethiopia, Libya, there's 3 of them. And then in verse 6, Gomer and all his bands with the house of Togarmah. Okay, who is Persia? Everybody knows who Persia is. That would be Iran. Now, I understand that the name Iran is something that they have adopted from about the 1930s, so that it was, before that, simply Persia. So there's not much debate on who that is. Now, if somebody thinks that this prophecy may have had a fulfillment in the past, I've only heard that once or twice, but I've read about it. I think this is a problem for that view, because Persia, Iran, has not been involved in an invasion of Israel in the past until modern times, and even now they're not invading, although they are paying other people to do this on their behalf. We'll talk more about that in a moment. So I think this suggests that this is something still for the future. What's going to happen now because of America's involvement with Israel against Iran? What's going to happen? What will the results be? The answer is, I don't know. But even if it turns out that a new government is installed that is not so adamant against Israel right now, knowing what happened in Russia from 1989 until the present, how they looked better and now they're turning worse, makes me think no matter what happens in Iran, if they turn out better, we still have years ahead when they're going to get worse. So I still think Iran is going to be part of this coalition. I mean, that's what it says. Ethiopia. Now, you see on the map, you might be able to see the name Ethiopia in Africa. I don't think that's what's intended in the prophecy. The word Ethiopia is not in the Hebrew, it's the word Cush. And the word Cush can refer to any number of people, nations, or peoples that are from Cush. And one of those peoples that is in the news modern times today, fighting against Israel and shooting missiles after them, is Yemen. And in Yemen, they're the Houthi rebels. And those Houthi rebels are Cushites. Now, I don't know that because I've been there and talked to them. I know that because I've researched on the internet. If you research on this internet and you find out, maybe I'm mistaken, you got my email address, so please tell me. We're talking about prophecy and things that are still pending. We're using our best judgment. But I believe that is Yemen. And so you see Yemen on the map as well. And they have been very belligerent and sometimes what I would consider irrationally belligerent. Okay, the next item is Libya. Now Libya, you see on the North African coast, Libya is on the map, it's in brown there. What's going on with Libya today? I don't know, not much. Now, some years ago, America brought military weapons against Libya, and Muammar Gaddafi, do I have that name right? He's gone. You may not think much of Muammar Gaddafi, but the more I researched about him, the more impressed I was. He actually, he was a dictator, there's no question, but he tried to do the best for his people, and he made a commitment. He made a commitment militarily about not getting certain military weapons. And that commitment was to be peace with Libya. Well, that didn't happen because America took him out. Now, like I say, I'm not political. I do like America. I would say that's a big mistake. And right now, what's going on in Libya, I don't know. It's kind of not really much in the news. But this says that Libya will be a force to be reckoned with as part of the coalition. We'll see. It says it's going to be, so I expect it to be. We'll see what develops. We have some years. As you know from what I said yesterday, I still think we have a decade and a half or so before this time is coming. Okay, then it says, Gomer and Togarmah. I'm going to hit Togarmah first. Togarmah does say, Togarmah of the north quarters. Is that Turkey? Most of the people I ask or talk to on the, about or seek on the internet say, yeah, that's Turkey. Not everyone, and even some very bright brethren have a different opinion on this. So I respect that. I've learned from them what they think. But I think Togarmah is Turkey. And the reason is partly because it says of the north. And if you look on the map, you see from Israel, Turkey is due north, just like Russia is even farther north. So I do think Turkey is involved here. Turkey has been part of the EU for a long time. I shouldn't say that. That's too precise. Turkey has been NATO. Thank you. Like I say, I'm not that political. I appreciate the correction. But they've been, parallel with Eastern Europe, Western Europe, I should say, rather. But they are turning more negatively against Israel in my observations over the last several years. That's all I'll say. But I do think they're involved here. Now, there's the next one, the last one, is Gomer. Now, I don't know deeply how to demonstrate about Gomer. It sounds like Germany to me, but I talked to other people that know more about this than I do. Jim Parkinson is one, and he suggests that Gomer is Germany. Now, that tells you you've got a few years to go, because Germany right now is opposed to Russia with the Ukrainian war. Now, I am surprised when that Ukrainian war started, and I'm surprised it's gone on for 4 years. So you see, I'm not really, a good predictor of things politically. But it's still going on, but it's got to be resolved. If Gomer is Germany, then there's got to be a resolution, and we have a lot of years for that. Now, why do I think it's credible that some country in Western Europe is going to be involved in this last conflict? It's because of what it says in Revelation 16. I'd like to turn to that passage. This is Revelation 16. We won't deal much with Revelation, just this passage only. But in Revelation 16, you have 6 plagues, and we're going to look at only one of them, and that is plague number 6. And it says in verse 13, I saw 3 unclean spirits like frogs come out of the mouth of the dragon and the beast and the false prophet. Now, the dragon, we usually think of political power exercised by Satan, but political power in the West. The beast we usually think of as papacy. I think both of those thoughts are right. On the false prophet, I've heard different opinions. I go with the conventional opinion that this is the Church of England. Why is it false prophet? That's a different point. I'll maybe just talk on that some other time. But whatever it is, the point is, this is Western. Even if it's just the dragon and the beast, you've got Western powers involved. So does it make sense that Western powers would be involved in this last conflict? And my answer is yes, it does to me. Let's look now at verse 14. They are the spirits of devils working miracles, which go forth to the kings of the earth and of the whole world to gather them to the battle of the great day of God Almighty. So what is that battle? Verse 16. And he gathered them together into a place called in the Hebrew tongue Armageddon. Armageddon? That's the last conflict at Israel. Is that an interpretation? Yeah, but it's a widely held interpretation, and I believe it's correct. Now, I heard a talk by Brother David Duran, and he suggested that this mention of the fact Hebrew tongue is a little indicator that something about natural Israel is being introduced here. I never thought of that before. I kind of think he's right. And I think this is suggesting that the Battle of Armageddon is going to be at Israel. If that's true, then the people that are directing nations to that area do have a Western contingent. Now, Germany is not a small country in Western Europe. It's one of a great deal of influence. So my opinion is that Germany is going to be a leader for Western Europe in this last episode. Well, we'll see. Keep watching. But now we're going to find out some other part of this episode, another group of nations that does not agree with this proposed invasion. We're going to go to verse 13. And in 13 it says, Sheba and Dedan, the merchants of Tarshish, with all the young lions thereof, say, are you come to take a spoil? In other words, what's your purpose in this? What are your plans here? Hast thou gathered thy company to take a prey, to take silver and gold, to take away cattle and goods and great spoil? The very fact that they're asking that question suggests they are not sympathetic to this invasion. It's not every country of the world that's going to be against Israel. This suggests there will be another contingent of nations that are not in favor of it. However, that doesn't mean they go in with an armed force and defend Israel. No, God's going to do that, and that won't happen. Nothing in this narrative says another Western contingent goes against them, but they're not sympathetic to it. Now, who are these people? Sheba and Dedan. Brethren that know more about this than I do, tell me that's Saudi Arabia. I believe that's true. I've checked on the internet, and I think that that's probably correct. Saudi Arabia today is not aligned with Iran. Iran is Shiite, Saudi Arabia is Sunni. It's like water and oil. They don't mix very well, especially if they're very strong. And right now, Saudi Arabia does not want to be allied with Iran. So I think that makes sense. But what about the merchants of Tarshish? The merchants, that would be a mercantile power. I've heard two options for this, either Spain or maybe England. I don't think Spain is going to be opposing to this situation. I think they're going to be part of the European community that is part of it. What I read about Spain and their thoughts about Israel do not inspire me to great confidence. But in England, I believe that's going to be not in favor of this invasion against Israel. Now you may say, oh, but Israel is getting some influences too. Yeah, all nations are. But I believe that this is talking about Israel. Why? Because they are a large mercantile power. Secondly, you see the next part, the young lions thereof. Who is the old lion? Who is the old British lion? England, that old empire. So I think probably the young lions are America, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, countries like that. They're not in favor of this conquest of Israel. So I think that there is this other coalition. Now I'd like to go back to verse number 11 and see what the enemy of Israel says in verse number 11. Thou shalt say, I will go up to the land of unwalled villages. I'll go up to them that are at rest, that dwell safely, all of them dwelling without walls and having neither bars nor gates. How is Israel ever going to be without bars or gates or armed forces? They won't. This is not something that Israel says. This is something the enemy of Israel says. Not that Israel is going to be defenseless, but that the enemy says we have so much might, they are by comparison helpless. That's my opinion about that text. I don't think Israel's ever going to say, you know, I think we're in good shape and we're going to lay down everything. I don't think they're going that way. But if you had Western Europe and you had Russia and you had the other allies focusing against Israel for whatever purpose, I think that would be, with Israel, overwhelming, and they wouldn't have the option. Okay, we have to move on. Time goes so quickly. We're going to move on to another text, another passage, and that's Psalms 83. Now, Psalms 83 deals with Arab nations that are going to be against Israel. But you notice that when we read Ezekiel 38, not a single Arab nation was listed, not a single one. There were Japheth nations, and there were Ham nations, but there were no Shem nations, which all Arabs would be. So this is now about the Arabs. And our suggestion here is that this is referring to something that is past, complete, in history. We'll see. Psalm 83. Verse 2, thine enemies make a tumult. They that hate thee have lifted up the head. They have taken crafty counsel against the people and consulted against thy hidden ones. They have said, come and let us cut them off, that is Israel, from being a nation. Now you can't say that until Israel is a nation. So my suggestion, we're interpreting here, is that this passage cannot begin until 1948. And what happened immediately after 1948, when Israel declared a nation? Their Arab neighbors invaded them, not to hope to damage them, but to hope to exterminate them as a nation. In fact, the Arabs told the Jews, the Arabs that were living in Israel, leave there, don't worry, as soon as we wipe them out, you can come back, it'll be your land. They had no intent on just damaging Israel. They had the intent of removing Israel. Let's see what verse 4 says. They have said, "Come and let us cut them off from being a nation, that the name of Israel may be no more in remembrance. They have consulted together with one consent. They are confederate against thee. Now we have a whole listing of all the nations that are against them." Now let's see. We have those listed on the screen in front of you, verses 6 through 8, Edom, Ishmael, Moab. I'm not really good at all those places, except I know that those are all places that border Israel and that are close neighbors, except one. And you'll see at the very end of verse 8, Asher is joined with them. Asher is old Assyria. That would be the country of Iraq today. Iraq is not bordering Israel, but Iraq also did venture to join in some of those forces against Israel, and there were 3 times when this happened. It happened in 1948, it happened again in 1967, and it happened again in 1973. Now, I don't know how old you think I am, but I wasn't here in 1948. One more year I was, but not in 1948. So I don't remember that experience, but we know it historically, all of us do. But in 1967, I was aware, and I was surprised. Everything that happens over there surprises me. In 1967, we had the 6-Day War, and Israel was spared demolition because they went on the aggressive and they went forward. But if they had not, they could have been destroyed. In 1973, I remember that also very well, and I was surprised by that. And in 1973, Israel almost lost that war. Now, I wasn't aware at the time how severe it was. But later, when I researched on the internet, I found out that Moshe Dayan, the guy with the patch on his eye? He told the prime minister, who was a woman, I think of her as Deborah, but she was Golda Meir. You know, Israel had only one judge that was a woman, that was Deborah. And as far as I know, Israel's only had one leader in modern times, Golda Meir, that was a woman. So he told her, "I think we're going to lose this war. I think we're going to have to give up." And she said, "No, we can't possibly." And then I've read many things about soldiers in that battle, in that war, that were just shocked at how things turned for Israel as they would express it by God's direction. Look it up on the internet. There's many records of things, and God did spare them. So there's 3 times when the Arabs invaded Israel. Do you realize there has not been another Arab national invasion of Israel for the last 50 years? And I'm surprised, because I didn't expect that to be the last thing. But now I look back and I say, I think that was the last thing. I haven't seen another Arab invasion. So in 2020, when the Abraham Accords came up, do you think it surprised me? Yes, I'm surprised by everything. But now looking back, I think, yeah, that was the final part of getting peace with the Arab neighbors. Now, I want to look here and see in Psalms 83 what it says further. It says, in verse number 9, "Do unto them," they're praying for God, "as you did to the Midianites." That was in the days of Moses. "And as you did to Sisera and Jabin." That was in the days of the judges. And then in verse 11, "Make their nobles like Oreb and Zeb, like Zebah and Zalmunna." That was in the period of the judges. Do you see how many examples God has given them about when God spared Israel in the past? Exactly 3, no more. And exactly 3 invasions, 48, 67, and 73. We haven't had another Arab invasion since that time. Okay, now you may be thinking, now wait a minute, Hamas was Arab and they did invade. Okay, yes, that's technically true. There was no possibility of Hamas eradicating Israel. No hope, no possibility. They went in and killed a lot of women and children and men that weren't ready, but there was no hope of destroying Israel. That wasn't even really feasible, because as soon as the army got involved. So there's only been 3 national invasions of Israel, and we suggest this is perhaps telling us the same thing. Okay, got to go on. Well, of course, there's going to be one more, Ezekiel 38, as you know, so there's going to be 4 total, but that won't be an Arab invasion. Okay, in 1978, we had the Camp David Accords. Now there's, what do we got here? Anwar Sadat, Jimmy Carter, and Menachem Begin. And they did get peace, and they finally, in 1979, that peace was finally secured. You notice the next one on the list, Jordan, 1994? A lot of years went by. What's that, 15 years went by before Jordan joined that accord. And finally, in 2020, even 16 years beyond, no, more than that, 6 to 26 years later, the Abraham Accords. And now you have United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, Sudan, Morocco, Malawi, and not formally, but essentially, Saudi Arabia. So you've got growing, increasing Arab peace with Israel. Now, it doesn't mean Arab love for Israel, does it? It means the Arabs say, we're not going to destroy them because they will destroy us. They're too strong. We're not going to try that anymore. Okay, and there's some Abraham Accords. There's a map of some of the others that entered in that aren't too close to Israel. We got to go on. Got to go on to Zechariah chapter 12. Now, I got this thought from Brother Kenneth Rawson. Not the complete thought, but the introduction to this thought. And I was quite surprised by it. It didn't occur to me privately. But Zechariah, the 12th chapter, I suggest, takes you through these four battles that are involved, 1948, 67, 73, and finally in Ezekiel 38. So let's look at verse number 6. Zechariah 12:6. In that day I will make the governors of Judah like a hearth of fire among the wood, like a torch of fire in a sheath. They shall devour all the people round about on the right and on the left, and Jerusalem shall be inhabited again in her own place, even in Jerusalem. When did that happen? When did Israel get old Jerusalem back again? 1967. No dispute, no debate about that. That's what Brother Rawson brought to my attention. But now if you go back forward in verse 7, you'll see what he did before 1967. The Lord shall save the tents of Judah first. Tents of Judah? You don't put tents up in the city. You put them on the outskirts of the city. In 1948, Israel did get the outskirts to Old Jerusalem, but they didn't get the old city itself. So the Lord shall save the tents of Judah first. That's in 1948/49 war. That the glory of the house of David and the glory of the inhabitants of Jerusalem do not magnify themselves against Judah. Verse number 8. Then the Lord shall defend the inhabitants of Jerusalem. You can't defend Jerusalem until you've got it. This has to be after 1967. This happened in 1973. They almost lost it. Even Moshe Dayan thought that. But they finally did overcome because the Lord saved them. The Lord shall defend the inhabitants of Jerusalem, and he that is feeble among them shall be like David. Verse number 9, it shall come to pass in that day that I will seek to destroy all the nations that come against Jerusalem. Ezekiel 38. That's my suggestion. Exactly 4 wars involved here, just like we have seen, combining Psalms 83 forward. Now in verse 10, that was read earlier in our sessions today. I will pour upon the house of David and the inhabitants of Jerusalem the spirit of grace and supplication. They shall look unto me whom they pierced, and there will be a national mourning like we have never seen before, with tears, weeping, thanksgiving, and earnest appreciation. Now let's go to Joel very quickly. In the book of Joel, we see mention of 4 wars, 4 conflicts. Now let's see. Can I find the book of Joel? Here it is. Joel chapter 1, verse 4. Joel is all about the time of the old Assyrian Empire. And you'll see listed on the screen 4 kings that invaded Israel in distant times. Now the last one, Sennacherib, that invaded in the days of Hezekiah. That's a picture of the last battle of Ezekiel 38. Talk about that in just a moment. But look at Joel 1, verse 4. That which the palmer worm hath left, the locust has eaten. That which the locust hath left, the cankerworm has eaten. That which the cankerworm hath eaten, the caterpillar has eaten. Now, your translations might say that differently, but all of them will have 4 items mentioned here. 4 wars that are involved against Israel before finally Israel is fully delivered. Now, our time's running short. It always is when I talk. That's the way it happens. So in Joel 2nd chapter, we can't read for you verses 12 through 19. But if you read those on your own, you'll see that is the last deliverance of Israel, when they have no option and they have to turn to the Lord. And finally, in verse 18, Jehovah will be jealous for his land and pity his people. In verse 25, chapter 2:25, it repeats these 4 invasions that have happened. And then in verse 28, he's going to pour out his Spirit upon all flesh. That takes us to the kingdom. Now, maybe in your mind you say, now, wait a minute. I've heard that cited by Peter in Acts chapter 2 about Pentecost. Yeah, that's right. Many prophecies have double fulfillments. And I believe that that was a fulfillment after the 4 literal Assyrian invasions. But finally, when we get to the kingdom, it'll be after the 4 invasions that are in our modern times. Okay, we're going to go a little further to Zechariah. Oh, excuse me. No, sorry. One more point. I forgot. You see that from Petah Tikva, the first Jewish colony in modern times, until 1948, when Israel was reestablished as a nation, how many years transpired that required to go before Israel became a nation again? How many years? 70 years? Okay. If you read that number and you know that Israel lost their national existence in a period of 70 years, way back in the days of Babylon, then I don't think the 70 years is by chance. I think the 70-year period is telling us this is God's reconstruction of Israel, that, the Babylonian Empire took them, and then the Roman Empire took them, and now they're coming back from the Roman captivity. But it reminds you of that initial captivity of 70 years. So I think that's not coincidental. One more mention of 1948, that's this. Some of you have heard this before. Maybe it's new to some of you. This is very interpretive. Peter tells us in his epistle that the ark represents redemption in Christ. It's made of wood. Wood is a picture of the ransom. And then it reigned for 40 days. When Jesus died, there were 40 years before Israel was exterminated in 73 with the fall of Masada. The 5 months, 5 is a picture of the gospel age, just like the 5 pillars in front of the Holy of the Tabernacle. That takes us to the end of the age in 1874. At least we note with interest that in Genesis 8:5, when they looked and saw the top of the mountains out in the distance, which Micah chapter 4 says refers to the nation of Israel, that it was 74 days later. Is that possibly a synchronization from 1874 to 1948? I think so. And then Genesis 8:13, the curse had not yet been removed, but finally the waters were gone, the curse is removed. They had to stay in the ark for some time period more, just like mankind has to stay in the redemption of Christ through the 1,000 years. So perhaps that again is another fix on 1948. And finally, Zechariah 14. We're going to look at a few verses here. We're going to turn first to Zechariah chapter 8. This is what God is going to do for Israel, as we all know, in the kingdom. Zechariah 8, verse 21 through 23. The inhabitants of one city shall go to another, saying, let us go speedily to pray before the Lord and seek the Lord of hosts. I'll go as well. Many nations and many people and strong nations shall come to seek the Lord of hosts in Jerusalem and to pray before the Lord. Thus saith the Lord of hosts, in that day it shall come to pass, 10 men shall take hold of the skirt of all languages of nations, shall take hold of the skirt of him that is a Jew, saying, we'll go with you, for we have heard that God is with you. Now we all look forward to that time. We're not there yet. We're not there to the time when all nations are going to say, ooh, we want to join with you. I wish the United Nations would read that and go with it. Not quite. They will someday. Now we go to Zechariah, the 14th chapter. Verse 8, "It shall be in that day the living waters shall go out from Jerusalem, half of them toward the former sea, half of them toward the hinder sea. In summer and winter it'll be perpetual. Jehovah shall be king over all the earth in that day. There shall be one Lord, and his name one." Verse 16, "And it shall come to pass that every one that is left of all the nations which came against Jerusalem shall even go up from year to year to worship the King, the Lord of hosts, and to keep the Feast of Tabernacles." You know, there were 2 7-day feasts in the law of Israel. 7 days for the Feast of Unleavened Bread. That's what we're enjoying during the 7 periods of the Gospel Age. And then another one for the world, that's in the autumn of the year, the Feast of Tabernacles. 7 days, just like with the Gospel Age, the second age of redemption, that the world of mankind is going to appreciate after Israel has recovered. Now, that's the last slide, but I'm going to add this. If you go back to Joshua chapter 5 and read the first 5 chapters of Joshua, which we won't do here today, you're going to find that Israel crossed over the Jordan River into the land of promise on a very special day. It was in the month of Nisan, and it was on the 10th day. What do you do on the 10th day of Nisan? You select the Passover lamb. Now, Brother Baker talked about the Passover and how this is Jesus and this is the ransom that he provided for mankind. They're finally going to look unto him whom they pierced, and they're going to recognize him as their Messiah. That's on the 10th day of Nisan. They choose, select, identify the Passover lamb. And then when you look at that narrative in Joshua, then they say to themselves, we've got a problem. We've been 40 years in the wilderness and we weren't circumcised. Just like the 40 years in the wilderness, a picture of the gospel age, Israel has not been circumcised in their heart. Now, Jeremiah is the one that talks about circumcision of the heart, not of the flesh. So they're going to be circumcised. And for 4 days, they're circumcised, all the men. They have to be recovered from that. And then on the 14th day, they enter 100% into the keeping of the Passover. I can't wait for that time. But I won't be here, and you won't be here, because the church will be beyond the veil in glory, and that will be wonderful. But we'll be there with a purpose and a reason, and that is to help the world of mankind crawl back to their deliverer, their Savior, appreciate him, and actually receive everlasting life. Everyone that is willing.